We are recording the interview of Tom Schwennesen. This interview is being conducted by David Barry from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Fairborn, Ohio. It is 1 p.m. on June 6th, 2019. Why don't we start with where and when were you born?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, 17th of January, 1948.
And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Clarence Joseph Schwennesen. My mother was Shirley Lee Eckert Schwennesen. My mother was a homemaker. I was born when she was 18. My father was a maintenance. He worked for the railroad for a period of time, Southern Pacific, maintaining the boxcars.
And did you have any siblings?
I have two younger brothers, Timothy and Terry. There's about a year and a half that separates Timmy and I, and 2 years difference between Terry and Timmy. And I'm 71 years old. So.
And then, did any of your family members serve in the military?
I trace family service back to the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather was in the 196th Light Infantry Battalion out of St. Louis, Missouri. He was a German. He fought in numerous wars. He was a cannoneer, and he ended up fighting down in Tennessee all the way over to Atlanta, Georgia. And 3 days before the Battle of Atlanta, he got shot in the thigh and ended up being transported back to Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, where he recovered. So he spent the whole period of the Civil War. He was single. I have the St. Louis newspaper that announced that he'd been shot. I have a copy of that framed at home. Also have a Martin Lutheran book. It's all in German, the old German script that he carried with him during the Civil War. Oddly enough, he never got promoted during that whole time, so that was unfortunate.
Wow, that sounds like you've really done your family lineage.
Well, then I had a great uncle. He was in the World War I in the Navy. My father served in the Navy on the Lexington during World War II. My brother Timmy was in the Navy shortly after I joined. He served at Chase Field in Beeville, Texas. Never got on a ship. He was a jet engine mechanic. My brother Terry, he got drafted into the Army, went to basic training Fort Leonard Wood, ended up being in finance, and during the war, or later part of the war, Vietnam War, he went to Stuttgart, Germany, and he spent his whole time over there. So I was the only one in Southeast Asia. So, yeah, we do have a lineage of service. My children, because of my length of service and our moving about, they chose not to go into service, which is fine.
What were you doing before you joined the military?
When I graduated out of high school at Wentzville, Missouri, as a 3-year attendee. At the end of 3 years high school, I had enough credits to graduate, so I took that option because I knew my last year I'd probably screw up and get in trouble. So I decided to go work instead, and my parents were divorced. My mother was taking care of us 3 boys. So I went to work at a filling station. When I turned 18, I started working at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. And during that period of time, I was a sheet metal guy, SMAR, they called, sheet metal assembler and riveter. I worked there for a year until I joined service. the Air Force. So I had a little bit of advanced, I guess, airframe training through them.
And what year did you join the Air Force?
I joined 6 March 67. I had gone in a delayed enlistment program on the 12th of December 66. Prior to a month prior, on the 10th of November 1966, my best friend him and I had talked about going into the Air Force together under a buddy system. Guy couldn't get two of us in to electronics, so another friend convinced my friend Bobby Smith to join the Army. Bobby was in Vietnam 2 days. He arrived on the 10th of November 66, got killed the 12th, 1966. When I got home from his funeral, I went and had my draft notice, so I went ahead and spoke to the Air Force recruiter and joined the Air Force. So that was a shame.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So was that your main reason for joining the Air Force, or for choosing the Air Force then?
Well, none of us want to go to Vietnam because of all the killings that were going on, happening, casualties and that. So that's how come Bobby and I had looked into going into the Air Force. We thought, well, we could get some sort of training that could help us in civilian life afterwards. And so when that didn't happen, it was for me, well, I don't want to, I've been to Fort Leonard Wood, I've seen their facilities, and I figured something had to be better than what they went through in basic training. So I ended up joining the Air Force. So that was primarily it. I went to basic training at Amarillo Air Force Base because Lackland had an outbreak of meningitis at that time period. And so they took half the troops and they would send them from the recruiting station to Lackland Air Force Base, and the other half went to Amarillo. I was supposed to go to Lackland, but one of the troops I signed up with, he was saying his buddies are all going to Lackland. He was supposed to go to Amarillo, so him and I switched, and I ended up going to Amarillo. While I was at Amarillo, they told us if you can take a bypass specialist test, you don't have to go to tech school, and you can go home for 10 days. So I sold my soul to the devil and went down, took the test, become an airframe repairman, and just barely passed the test, but ended up nevertheless as a sheet metal guy, airframe repair. And my first assignment was Randolph Air Force Base, which is the showcase of Air Force. Beautiful place. So I got there and worked and learned my trade. Learned very well, and a lot of encompassing of the whole career field that I was in, doing airframe, working on T-37, T-38s, T-29s, C-47s, helicopters. We were a flying training mission, and so the planes were flying constantly, and so it required a lot of maintenance. So I would grab my toolbox and they'd send me off to the flight line to fix repairs, and there was some just phase dock work, T-39 phase dock, T-38, T-37, and we did cable, plastic tubing, fiberglass, radomes, canopies, a whole gambit. And then I got an assignment to go to Nong Kham Phanom, 3 September 1969, was when I was supposed to report to San Francisco, Travis Air Force Base, to depart to Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. When I left my wife, we had met her family in California, and we had promised we would write to each other every day or send tapes back and forth. So right away, when I got to San Francisco on the 3rd September, I started writing of some of the events that occurred to me. And like we had 160 troops flying over on the plane, the commercial plane. We stopped in Hawaii, we stopped at Wake Island, and then we flew into Guam, and then we flew over to Bangkok. Once I got to Bangkok, they put us up at a place called the Luxury Hotel. And just so happened that the young airman who sat next to me on the flight was also going to NKP. So him and I bunked together at the same room at the hotel, and then next day we caught a C-130 and made some hops and ended up at NKP, where I ended up in the 56th Field Maintenance Squadron as a sheet metal guy. I lived in first the Hooches, which was right across from the Chow Hall. I could see the base theater straight out my front door, the indoor theater, the outdoor theater, the bank, the BX, the little shop bed. The Mars station was close by. It was very convenient where I was at, just centrally located amongst everything. So it was primitive. We had a small room. There was 5 of us assigned to that particular little hooch room. You had a latrine in between rows of hooches, took cold showers, worked 5.5 days a week, 12 hours a day, 6 in the morning till 6 at night, half day, 6 in the morning till noon. That was to give us like preparation so we could do our laundry and get haircuts and what have you. So I went to the sheet metal shop, and there was 56 of us assigned to that particular shop to maintain all the base aircraft. I don't remember all of them. I remember several of them. Some of them we became quite good friends, and I hate to see them leave, return back to the States. The experience I had from Randolph really helped out when I got to NKP. I was one of the more experienced people. I was very successful in getting promotions. I was E5, 3 years of service, and so I saw guys retiring at that rank with 20 years of service and more. Whenever the planes came back with bullet holes, we'd have to go out there and patch them. I worked day shift. Took care of TCOs. I took care of dispatching. I took care of a lot of administrative stuff, plus myself going out and repairing on the plane, working on the planes. Rescue hoists on the CH-3s and HH-3s. I worked the TCTO to install all those rescue hoists. And I did it in about half the allotted time. So the supervisors were very impressed with that work that I did. So they want me to go to other bases to help them out and show them how to do it quicker, because they were falling behind and taking care of theirs. The whole gambit of aircraft that were assigned, all the way from O1s, O2s, OV-10s, A1s of all models, the helicopters, the A-26s, We worked on all of them, on the phase docks, just a whole gambit of everything.
Was there any one in particular that you enjoyed working on over another?
The ones that weren't broke. The A-26s were being prepared to return back to the States. They gave me a crew of about 4 individuals to go and work in the phase dock to make sure they could fly back to the States. And I remember I referred to the crews my goon squad because they were absolutely the worst sheet metal guys we had. I had to work with them and teach them how to make these repairs. Come back where after working on them, you'd be all oily and greasy. Probably the easiest ones were the helicopters. The more difficult ones were the C-123s that the tail section was high off the ground, so you would have to use a stand to work and lean over to work on those. The A-1s, one particular day, after a night of partying and drinking hard, everybody was out. We must have had a rescue mission going on and ended up with Staff Sergeant Kirkland and myself being the only 2 back in the shop. So we got a job to go down and work on this tail section that had battle damage. And Kirkland said he knew my situation, so he says, I'll get up in the tail section and you can do the repair on the outside and I'll go inside and buck the rivets. And I told him, no, it's my job. I'm junior. I'll go up there. And it was extremely hot and it sobered me up real fast. I was completely drenched when I came out of there and swore I wouldn't do it again soon. So yeah, it was my favorite aircraft was the ones I didn't work on.
So was NKP, or what did NKP stand for?
Non-Kam Phnom Thailand.
Oh. I was wondering if that was in Thailand or...
Yes. We were on the Laotian border about 5 miles from Laos, separated in Mekong River, separated us from Laos. We were always attuned to possibly attacks from Vietnamese from the other side of the river. Fortunately, we did not get attacked, but we were issued our weapons a couple of times, which always was a harrowing experience because we had gun cards. We weren't issued guns or rifles to carry around with us. They would just, our M16s, they kept them in a locker, and they gave us gun card, and we had to line up to be issued our weapon. So once they got up, there was like a 2-block long line, and I thought, man, this is crazy. You know, if the VC attack, they could easily kill all of us. And then we got up there and you'd have to give them the serial number of the weapon. Well, there was a couple of numbers on these little gun cards and everybody was confused what number to give them. And the people issuing the rifles, they were all upset because we didn't know the numbers. And they gave us each 10 rounds of ammunition. We had to count it out. Then we report to our work section. As soon as we got there, they took the guns away from us because they were afraid we'd shoot them. And they took the rounds away from us. After we got the all clear sign, then we had to get back in line and once again get out our gun card, give them the serial number, and count out each round of ammunition to make sure they got 10 rounds back. So that only occurred maybe 2 or 3 times. I know of one incident where they said there were snipers out on the perimeter. I believe a Thai got shot, one of the Thai guards. Occasionally some flares would go off, you know, when they suspected something. But that was mostly it.
Was this your going to Thailand? Was that your first time leaving the United States?
Yes, yes. Matter of fact, when I joined service, I really hadn't been outside Missouri, St. Louis area. We mostly, all our family was in the St. Louis area. And so if we went somewhere, my father was a fast pitch softball player, and that's how he got his jobs. He played in the Industrial League, and he was a very good pitcher. Won championships several times. We used to have a lot of trophies of his, and companies would say, we can't pay you to play for us, but we'll hire you, give you a job. And because of the softball, we would go to tournaments in different areas, St. Louis, Illinois area. And so that was when basic training to Texas came, that was my real first trip to Texas, outside St. Louis. And then, of course, I'd never been overseas, so, going. When my wife and I got married, we had driven out to California. It was 1969. I had a 1969 Camaro Rally Sport, nice yellow black vinyl top car. And so my wife and I drove to California. And then from Los Angeles, I flew up to Travis, and then from there over. So, yeah, it was an eye-opening experience to be in a different country.
What was there any culture shocks, or what was the?
There was right off the bat as we're traveling to our hotel. The guys were just defecating in the water, the lakes, and there'd be people right next to them fishing. When I stopped at Guam, I was using the urinal, and a little lady came in and started wiping all around, cleaning. And so I thought, well, if you're not embarrassed, I'm not either. Sanitation, it just, and the diet of the people, the Thai workers, we had 3 of them. They got paid 15 cents an hour to be sheet metal guys. I asked, why didn't they pay them more? And they said, well, the king doesn't want them to inflate to U.S. Wages, because once they depart, then those people would be expected to maintain that wage, and their country could not sustain that. So they ended up paying them 15 cents an hour. And they would show up with a rice ball sticky, and they would have for meat little bitty frogs. They would eat the bugs, insects, which, some of the guys I knew would eat locusts and that and try out the rice bugs and that, but I never did. That was not for me.
Was there anything that you were able to do for fun or relaxation while you were over in Thailand?
Well, while I was over in Thailand, I got word my wife had a miscarriage after I'd been there about 6 weeks. And I did not go downtown until about my 11th month there. So I spent quite a bit of time off duty after work going to movies. Probably about 4 times a week. I would attend the outdoor theater, and then when they closed that down due to the weather, went to the indoor theater. They built a brand new USO club, which served coffee, donuts, breakfast items. I would go there, and I had some albums I liked, particularly a group called Smith, and they had a song, A Whole Lot of Love, and I used to just sit back and listen to that album and enjoy playing darts with my friends, playing pool with my friends. They If you went to gamble, which I used to play blackjack, we would go to the Airmen's Club, and several times I won several $100 playing blackjack, and they had a dice table there at the club. They had slot machines. The dice table eventually got banned from the base. The dependents were writing to the base commander that their spouses were losing all their paychecks there. So the base commander ordered the owner to remove the dice table. He ended up selling it to some unsuspecting airmen who thought they were going to make a ton of money off this dice table, only to be told after they purchased it that they had to move it off base. So they relocated it downtown, and I heard they never did recoup all the funds that they had spent trying to buy it from the guy. I liked swimming. We had a swimming pool. Between the USO Club, the swimming pool, getting sleep, and taking care of the necessities that I had to do, I kept quite busy.
So then you joined the Air Force in '67.
Yes.
And then what year did you go over to Thailand?
I went over September 1969.
And then when did you get married?
I got married 26 August 1967. My wife and I got married in San Antonio, Texas.
So I take it you met your wife before you joined the military?
Well, no. Actually, when I was being assigned to Randolph, and after my leave in St. Louis, I got on the plane, landed at San Antonio, ended up going downtown to Continental Bus Station to catch a ride out to Randolph Air Force Base. Missed the bus, told there would be one later on. Met some Navy recruits who were wanting to join the Navy, and they invited me to walk downtown San Antonio with them. And as we were walking about, I noticed these girls, they would go by honking at us and waving, and the Navy, well, the potential Navy guys would say, man, I was in my uniform, so they said, man, that uniform is sure attracting a lot of girls. And I told them, no, these are just rags, they're just nothing. And so I said, let me prove it. And two girls drove by in a Rambler, and they toot their horn, and I hollered, pull over, and they pulled over and convinced them to give me a ride out to Randolph. And on the way, I spoke with the passenger, and Maria Contreras, and I asked Maria, I said, do you like to dance? And she said, yes. I said, well, I'm just new here. Maybe we can go dancing. So I called her up. She gave me her phone number. They dropped me off at the main gate at Randolph. And later, on Friday nights, I used to meet her and we'd go dancing. And from there, we got married. And so when I went to Thailand, we'd been married about 2 years, didn't have children, and we were trying to have children. And lo and behold, they surprised me when they called. Red Cross called me when I was at NKP and said, your wife has had a miscarriage. So I couldn't come back to the States. And the only thing I do is go to the Mars station and talk to her over the radio. And they allowed me to be first in line. When I made the phone call, I called her the house, and unfortunately she was still in the hospital. So I spoke with her mother, learned about she almost died. So from then on, I would keep her in my thoughts every day. So, yeah, so we were married 2 years. After my tour, I had 6 months left in the Air Force. And the Air Force, I chose to get out of service. At that time, I was a staff sergeant, and I thought, well, since I've been so successful in the Air Force, making staff in 3 years, I'll do well in civilian life, So I got out of service, went back to St. Louis, went back to the airplane factory, worked about 3 weeks and got laid off. They said, okay, everybody with line number, badge number from here to here, you're laid off. And my badge number fell within that, even though they counted my time in service. I got laid off, so I kicked around for a couple of weeks, didn't know what to do, went down to San Antonio, ended up calling some friends of mine back at Randolph, and they said, we can get you back in the Air Force if you'll come work for us. So I said, okay. So they worked with some people they knew over at MPC, which is headquarters for assignments, and they got me back in the Air Force. But I didn't end up working for them because they said, we don't need sheet metal guys anymore. They said, choose something else. So I said, well, what would you have? And they said, well, we have different variety of jobs you can do. And I said, well, over back at NKP, the welder worked 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'd like to become a welder. So I end up in the welding career field and went to tech school at Chanute Air Force Base, was stationed at Randolph once again, and ended up making E7 once I had 7 years of service. At Randolph, they called me and said, we have an assignment. Would you like to go to work Air Force One Presidential Unit up in Washington, D.C., Andrews Air Force Base? And I told them, what's my options? And they said, well, either you can volunteer to go or we're going to send you anyway. So I said, well, I'll volunteer to go. So I end up at Andrews Air Force Base, NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge of the welding shop. And at that time, they were consolidating the 89th, which had another welder and myself, with the local CAMS unit at the base level. They had about 5 or 6 people in their welding shop, two of them being civilian, one being in charge. And they displaced him as a shop supervisor with me. And so I was there in the presidential unit for 4 years. Right at 10 years, I made master sergeant. And so when my tour was up, they contacted me and said, would you mind retraining into another career field? And at that time I said, well, once again, what's available? And they said, well, radar repair or explosive ordnance disposal. And I told them, how about computer programming? And they said, well, you have to go down and take the electronic data processing test. And I asked them, well, what do you study? They said, you don't study anything. It's just kind of general knowledge, and there isn't anything particular. So I went and I took the test, and they said, if you score so high, you become a computer operator. If you score above that, up to this point, you can become a computer programmer. Well, I scored high enough to become a computer programmer. So then I retrained and became a computer programmer, of which there were very few enlisted people in that particular field, and that was in 1979. So from 79 to 84, I was stationed at Scott Air Force Base, in the 1500 Computer Support Squadron. And I was there for 5 years. One of the big deals we had was switching out the computers from Burroughs to Sperry Univac. I had been working on Honeywell programming, worldwide WMIX command and control. I was in charge of an enlisted team because they didn't have much faith in some of the officers, and so they put me in charge of these enlisted troops. And when they asked me to become the leader, I told them, well, I can't have any officers assigned under me, you know. So in 84, I then transferred up to the 1930th and 1931st at Elmendorf Air Force Base Comm Squadron and Comm Wing. There I handled plans and programs, and at that point I was an E8, was stationed up there for 6 years, made Chief Master Sergeant E9 while I was up there. Left there in 1990 and went, I was on my way to Randolph Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, and they diverted me to Lackland Air Force Base. They said, we have a job opening over at Lackland. Do you want the job? And I said, well, how many officers do you have in the squadron? They said, we have 2, the squadron commander and the chief of maintenance. They said, you'll be the chief of operations. So I said, okay, I'll take that job. So I did that job till 1994. I retired the 31st of July, 1994.
Wow, that's quite a career.
Very varied. I enjoyed my time in service. I ended up spending 27 years and 5 days. My last year, once I hit 26, they had done away with my job. They had consolidated operations and maintenance in the comm squadron and put a civilian in charge. Asked me if I wanted to go to Del Rio, if I considered going to Webb Air Force Base to straighten out the comm squadron down there, because they had a chief down there who they said it was just causing havoc. And I drove down there for the day, looked around, drove back to Randolph, Lackland, and told them I'm putting in my paperwork, but it's going to be from a year out to retire. So I didn't have a job at all. So I went back to Randolph Field Maintenance, spoke to the commander and said, yeah, I used to be stationed here as a sheet metal guy and then later as a welder. I'd like to see if I can't get those skills back, even though I'm a computer programmer and manager over here, just for the heck of it. So he said yes. So I went back. I outranked every enlisted troop in their squadron, which caused some heartache for the next ranking guy below me. But I work night shift. I go in, take off my blouse and hang it up, and got my certifications all back in. Before I could get to the welding or sheet metal shop to pick up that experience, they had a complaint from the IG that you had a high-ranking guy doing 3-level work. And so the commander and I agreed I would go back to Lackland and just sit at a desk and read newspapers. So I did that until I discharged. Once I got out, I worked civil service, Defense Language Institute at Lackland Air Force Base. I had told my wife I didn't want to be in charge of people anymore. I just wanted an 8-to-5 job and no other responsibility. So I became a computer programmer again, writing code for a grading test, developing tests for the students who come from a variety of nations, including U.S. Puerto Ricans who don't have a good command of the English language. And I write tests. They had a test bank, and I would write the programs, assemble all the factors in choosing particular questions to use or not. So I did that for about 4 years, and then I took a job over at Fort Sam Houston as a web developer for an organization called USAMITIC, U.S. Army Medical Information Technology, developing software for the Army hospitals. And so I visited a variety of different Army posts doing installation of software on their hospital computers. One of the prettiest places I ever been was West Point. Very beautiful area up there, a lot of history. When I was at Andrews, my wife and I, at that time we had children, and we used to go out to the various historical sites to look around.
Wow. Well, I only have a couple questions left for you.
Okay.
What are some life lessons you learned from your military service?
I would guess to be your own person. I always felt, and I would tell people, I may be a chief master sergeant, but I'm not like other chief master sergeants. I try to be reasonable, and I put myself in the place of the other person. And if you're true to yourself and you respect other people, it'd be much easier. And that's what gave me my enjoyment to seeing the troops succeed. And the service isn't for everybody. And I would tell the young enlisted troops, if you're going to get out and you're not going to go to further your education, your parents don't know someone who can help get you a job, maybe you might consider staying in the Air Force, because it's not bad. You have 3 hots and a cot. But, you're not going to get rich either. So, do your best. You take care of yourself, and I'll try to help you along.
And then, is there anything you feel like we haven't covered in this interview?
No.
Anything you'd like to discuss?
Well, these particular letters, I had discovered my wife had saved all the letters I wrote to her from NKP. She had over 322 pieces of correspondence. So I decided one time just to try to put them, see what they were, and lo and behold, it was very refreshing looking through those letters, and I can recall writing particular instances. And so in those, I would include clippings from maybe the base paper, church bulletins, and so I have a post that every day where there's something where I felt like I wrote my wife, I posted on the 56 Special Operations Facebook page. So today being the 6th of June, this morning I post the what I wrote to her on the 6th June 1970, the 7th and 8th of June, because of our being here at the reunion. And there's a nice little following. People see it, and basically it's what noble things I was involved in. Not everything, but, so I enjoy it, and I hope the other people on the website enjoy it as well. They give us a little view of what we have It surprised many people that, that I had access to this. And how did I gain this knowledge? Well, being a sheet mill guy, anytime the planes went out, a lot of times they came back with battle damage. And so I was aware of that battle damage. Just the other day, I had included in my writing to my wife, I'm tired of war. And I'm tired of seeing planes go out and come back all shot up. Yeah. So, it's not nice. Of course, I was involved in Iraqi freedom and that. I had to send people over during the first Middle East war. Unfortunately, I had to send women over too, send for 6 months at a time. So that was a difficulty, a difficulty of mine, especially subjecting some of the women, but you have to be fair. Everybody's good. When their time comes, I would always tell my troops, don't volunteer for anything, but if you have to go, because when the first Gulf War happened, they were all wanting to, I want to go. Well, let me tell you a story about my best friend. So, when they call you, go. Otherwise, enjoy your family. Yes. So, that's it.
Well, is there any message you'd like to leave for future generations, or do you feel like what you just said kind of...
Well, I think that pretty well sums it up, serve your nation when you have to, and just don't limit yourself to your own surroundings. Get yourself involved in your community, volunteering, and if you can do so much good for your nation in so many ways.
Well, this concludes our interview, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this interview, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.